Good morning, everyone. I'm Mara Manis, the Executive Director of NYSCA. It's so wonderful to be with you this morning. We're joined by hundreds of potential applicants from across all 10 New York State regions. I don't know if you had a chance to glance at our opening slide. That's the Moynihan train station. If you haven't visited yet, it's an incredible space filled with wonderful art. And just now we were seeing the photography of Stan Douglas in the visitors lounge, which was designed by the Rockwell Group. Before we begin, I wanted to take this moment to give a big shout out to our staff under the leadership of our deputy directors, Megan White and Abigail Young. They have done a phenomenal job at reimagining the funding opportunities for this year in response to the times that we are living through. I also wanted to give a big shout out to our Governor Cuomo, as well as the New York State legislature for providing historic funding to the arts this year, $105 million to NYSCA. We are so very grateful. I want to remind you that if you've not already done so, we have another webinar tomorrow. You can check out our webinar page on our website. It's called Support for Artists. Spread the word if it's not about you. We'd really appreciate that. You can find all of the schedule and the registration links on that website, along with the virtual office hours sign up on that same page. So today's webinar will be an overview of our FY22 Round 3 Recovery Grants. And Katie and David are here with us to walk us through eligibility, the timeline, and pre-qualification. Many thanks to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We'll have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and you can still submit questions to the Q&A feature at the bottom. We do encourage you to listen to the whole presentation before you submit your questions, because you'll find that many of those will be on the slides that are included in today's presentation. A reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the NYSCA website along with the presentation deck. I'm now pleased to introduce our program directors, Katie Steger and David Huff, who will lead us through this opportunity. Welcome to the NYSCA stage, David and Katie.
Thank you, Mara, and welcome everyone. I am Katie Steger. I'm the Interim Director for Folk Arts and Music, and I'm here with my colleague David Huff, who's the Program Director for Presenting in the REDC Initiative and the Interim Director for Theater, because you needed a third job. And I am very excited to be with you all today to talk about our Recovery Grants program that is part of our Round 3 funding in FY22 at NYSCA. So just as a brief reminder before we jump in with both feet, the FY22 guidelines and the application manual can both be found on the FY22 opportunities page on the NYSCA website. That website is listed on this page. It is arts.ny.gov/FY22 funding opportunities. So let me give a brief overview before we jump into the details. The Recovery Grant Program is designed to support arts and cultural nonprofit organizations who have been negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We intended to streamline this program in order to get funds into the hands of organizations quickly. It is our intention that all organizations that are eligible for the program, that is those that meet all of the eligibility criteria, will receive funding. That being said, there are a set amount of resources, and we do expect a lot of applications. So if there are more requests than we are able to fund through the budget, priority will be given to organizations that meet specific priority criteria, and those are going to be discussed in greater detail further in this presentation. An important note about grant amounts and organization size. There are 2 different grant amounts for this program. A minimum award of $10,000 for organizations with budgets of $100,000 or more. If your organization has an operating budget of less than $100,000, then you are eligible for a minimum award of $5,000. Those are award minimums. And those operating budgets are calculated using your FY19 total expenses from your IRS 990 if you have that. The funding is meant to be flexible, so we're not prescriptive about where you can spend it other than some ineligible expenses that we will discuss later. and there is no match required for this program. The application portal opens on July 19th, which is next week, and it closes at 4 p.m. on September 1st, 2021. You must be pre-qualified in New York State in order to be eligible for this program. You need to be pre-qualified at the time of the application deadline, that is September 1st at 4 p.m. You can check your pre-qualification status if you've done this before, or you can get pre-qualified by visiting the Grants Gateway online portal. More information about this in the next slide. So the process for pre-qualification allows nonprofits to address questions and concerns prior to entering the grant process or any competitive bid process in New York State. So you must finish this, as I said on the last slide, you must finish this and complete your pre-qualification process by the time the application deadline gets here. So you can't submit and then afterwards take care of this. I encourage everyone to look into this right away. More information on pre-qualification can be found in Section 8 of the NYSCA application manual. That website is listed on this slide. It is arts.ny.gov/FY22 funding opportunities. If you have any questions about this process, you can always contact the NYSCA pre-qualification team, and they're available at the email address on the slide, help@arts.ny.gov. And now I'm going to toss it over to David to talk about the eligibility criteria for the Recovery Grant Program.
Great. Hi, everyone. You're going to hear this several times in this presentation, but one of the things that makes this program different than some of other NYSCA's programs is that we are primarily evaluating based off of eligibility. So we're doing reviews on an eligibility as opposed to some sort of subjective assessment. So about 90% of the questions we've already received are about eligibility requirements. We're going to go through them. We're going to, hopefully this is going to answer most of them. But if you meet these eligibility requirements, we are recommending that you apply. So the first one, you must be a New York-based nonprofit organization with arts and culture as a central part of your purpose or mission. Next slide. You must have a significant track record of publicly available arts and cultural programming. You must be planning to provide publicly available arts and cultural programming in the next 12 months. You must have a operating budget of under $10 million using the same FY 2019 total expenses on your 990 that Katie mentioned in the last slide. And you must not have received more than $150,000 from the Shuttered Venue Operating Grant Program, or SVOG. If you have applied for SVOG funding but haven't yet got a determination, you could still apply to this program, but if you end up receiving over $150,000, you will have to decline this award. All right, next slide. And then last but not least, you need to demonstrate a decrease in total revenue since March 2020 in excess of your grant amount. So either that $5,000 or $10,000 threshold. We're going to go into that in more detail. But that's a critical part of this application is showing financial loss from before and after the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's been some questions about eligibility that I think this could hopefully answer. If you are a smaller organization with a budget of under $100,000, you are still eligible to apply. When you click on the application guidelines, they're broken out into two sections, one for larger and one for smaller organizations. But all organizations that meet the other requirements that have budgets of under $10 million are eligible to apply. If you have never received NYSCA funding before, this is a great program to start on. You are eligible to apply as long as you meet the other requirements. If you have gotten funding before, you are also eligible to apply. If you've applied for Restart NY grants that closed earlier this month, if you are applying to other NYSCA grants, including support for organizations, you are eligible to apply. And if you have ongoing multi-year funding, you do not need to decline multi-year funding to apply to this program. In general, if you meet the eligibility requirements, you should apply for this program because we have designed it so that it does not preclude you from any other resources being offered by this agency. Next slide. I'm going to toss it back to Katie to talk about this demonstration of lost revenue.
Thank you, David. So as David and I have both sort of started to discuss, one of the major eligibility criteria for this program is showing a loss of revenue since before the pandemic began. So how do we do this? Well, we do it by comparing specific financial documents from before and after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. This slide has a lot of text on it. Do not let it intimidate you. It is not as complicated as it looks. The very basic premise here is if you had a certain amount of revenue from before the pandemic began and the amount you had in the year following was significantly less, you have a loss of revenue. And this is just going to explain to you how you can show that to us. So you want to show us two specific documents, one from before and one from after. The document from before should show your total annual revenue, excluding restricted capital income. So let's say you had, as an anomaly in this year, a major capital campaign, and so it looks like you have a lot more revenue. We're going to exclude that extraordinary capital income from how we calculate your revenue. So your total annual revenue, excluding restricted capital income from before the pandemic, can be shown by uploading one of two documents, either an FY19 IRS Form 990 or a board-approved financial statement that includes financial data from prior to March 2020. Now, board approval happens in a number of different ways. This may be a document that is signed by an officer of your board or the chair of your board. You may have full board approval from a vote. You may attach minutes from a board meeting. It really depends on your governance policy for what board approval looks like, but you need to demonstrate that board approval in these documents. So from before the pandemic, you can show us one of these two documents for your fiscal year 19 total revenue. From after the pandemic began, you can show us one of three documents to demonstrate your total annual revenue. This could be your 2020 IRS Form 990, if it includes financial data from after March 2020, or your 2021 IRS Form 990, and that which one you choose depends on where you have your losses and also when your fiscal year ends. If you don't have either of those documents available at this time, you can also upload a board-approved financial statement that includes this financial data from after March 2020. If you have specific questions about this, if you have a particularly odd fiscal year situation, you know, a lot of folks have funny things that make it a little complicated. We really encourage you to reach out to program staff to discuss the matter and help you determine the best way to demonstrate this loss of revenue. But the main thing to know is these documents need to show a total loss of revenue that exceeds the grant amount you are eligible for. The next slide. So to elaborate on that point, the documents that you submit, if you are an organization with total expenses of $100,000 or more from FY19, that means your total annual operating budget in 2019 was $100,000 or more, you are eligible for a $10,000 minimum grant from this program. And that means you need to show a loss of total revenue of at least $10,000. Similarly, if you are an organization that had an annual operating budget or total expenses on your IRS 2019 Form 990 of less than $100,000, you must show a loss of total revenue of at least $5,000 to be eligible for a minimum grant of $5,000. Next slide. As I said at the beginning, the intention of this program is really that every eligible organization gets funded. But of course, we may get more applications than we are able to fund with the resources that we have. So if that is the case, we have a set of questions in the application that help us determine whether you fit into one of the priority categories for the program. You do not need to fit one of the priority categories in order to apply, but these priorities will help us make determinations about both whether to approve a grant or the ultimate size of the grant. So given that, priority will be given to organizations in one of the following areas. Those that are based in regions with lower concentrations of arts organizations, those with annual expenses under $5 million based on their 2019 financial data, those whose primary public activities take place in economically distressed business areas as defined by the most recent census data, those that are within and serve historically underrepresented communities, and those that have a significant track record of producing and presenting live in-person performing arts and who have confirmed plans to offer live in-person programming between July 1st and June 30th, 2022. So I'm going to throw it back over to David to talk about what our review process looks like. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Katie. So the review process is fairly straightforward. We're going to review will be conducted by panelists and or staff for eligibility and priority thresholds. Due to the expected volume of applications, we're not going to provide individual feedback on any applicant on panel scoring. As a note, if your IRS 990 shows 3 consecutive years of more than 10% decline in net assets between 17 and 19, we may require additional information in order to determine your eligibility for this program. However, if your organization falls into this category, I still recommend that you apply to this program. It's designed to be fast to apply to and fairly straightforward. So we just may end up asking more information from you in order to determine eligibility. Next slide. Now we're going to go into some frequently asked questions. So the first has to do with organizations that may not have their own 501c3. So I'm an individual artist. My organization uses a fiscal sponsor, but does not have its own 501c3. Or my organization has a non-arts mission, such as a university or a social service organization, but has a strong track record of arts programming. Can I still apply? The answer is, next slide, no. This program is only open to nonprofit organizations with arts and culture as a central part of their mission. So the questions all have to do with a single organization, not a program or department within an organization. And you must have a 501c3 with arts and culture as the central part of your mission to apply. All right, next question. What do I need to include with my narrative? What do I provide information about the impact of our programming? The answer is, next slide. The answer is generally you don't need to. This does not have a traditional narrative. You are not going to be talking about the relative merits of how you intend to spend this recovery grant. You are just answering questions about eligibility and the priority thresholds in order to help us determine this. So there's a lot of questions about, can I use this funding for my film program? Can I use it for my executive director's salary? The answer is yes. There's a list of ineligible expenses in the guidelines. That's pretty long, but it's things like you can't use it for lobbying or for paying for out-of-state travel or to do things like food and receptions. But other than that, this is a flexible grant that is supposed to be used where you see the most fit. Next slide. All right. My organization is in year 2 of 3 of the NYSCA grant. Can I apply? My organization has applied for Restart New York funding, or my organization is planning to apply for support for organizations. Can I apply? The answer is yes. Yes, you can apply. If you get nothing else from this webinar, I think one of the major questions we get is, can I apply for both support for organizations and recovery grants? The answer is yes. Yes, you can. And if you are eligible, I recommend that you do so. Do you need to decline any previously granted funding in order to apply for this program? No, you do not need to decline any funding. You are eligible to apply. So no matter what else you've applied for, no matter what other funding you're getting from NYSCA, you can apply to Restart New York, or you can apply to these recovery grants. Okay. Who should I contact if I have more questions? All right, so for technical questions, including pre-qualification or how to use our online portal, you would go to help@arts.ny.gov. For any sort of opportunity-related questions, your first stop should be the program staff in the discipline area that's most aligned with your organization's work. So if you are a theater organization, you would be contacting me and my colleague, Deborah Lim. If you are a different discipline, you would go onto our organization staff page, find the staffer that meets you, that matches with your discipline, and contact them directly. If you don't know or don't feel like you have a good fit, you can ask a question to the help desk and they will route it where it's supposed to go. We ask that you please submit questions at least 2 weeks before the application deadline, and to note that we cannot review written draft application materials. All right, next slide. All right, throw this. All right, I'm going to do this one. So today's webinar is one of a series of webinars and office hour sessions that we're going to be hosting to best support you during our FY22 application process. Thank you for those of us who have been following the webinars so far. We have one more tomorrow, and then on Friday we're going to have office hour sessions. Each webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the NYSCA website with the link there. And tomorrow, as I mentioned, is going to be support for artists at 11 o'clock as well. And then there will be office hours on Friday. Please, if you're going to be attending and asking questions or coming to the office hours, I strongly recommend that you read the relevant guidelines so that you can ask questions that will directly affect your application. All right, thank you. I think we're going to now go to the question and answer period. I'm going to toss it over to Katie for the first one, and then we'll take turns.
Thank you, David. Let's start off with one that I think everybody, a question that everybody seems to have, and we've tried to address, but I'm going to ask it again. Can I apply for support for organizations and recovery grants? It's in the same round. At the same time. Yes, you definitely can. And if you are eligible for this program, you definitely should. Please apply. It will not affect your status one way or another with either program if you apply to both. In that same vein, I'll just toss a second one in there. Can we apply for a recovery grant without declining our previously awarded general support grant? If you have multi-year support, from a previous year, it has no bearing on this program. You absolutely are eligible to apply.
I see a question that's saying, if I do not fit in a priority category, can I still apply? So the priority questions will help us sort some of these applications. But as we mentioned at the top, our hope and intention is that all eligible applications are funded. And I anticipate that this will be a short application to fill in. So if you meet the eligibility requirements, I recommend that you apply regardless of whether or not you fit into any specific priority category.
And someone asks, I'm going to just stick with I'm going to skip ahead, David. Is this grant different from the Rapid Recovery Grant? And I'm assuming that means the Restart New York. That's a grant for performing arts. Yes, it is a different opportunity. And if you applied for that opportunity, you can also apply for this opportunity as well. Both are recovery grants. They have somewhat different requirements, but you are eligible to apply for both.
Great. What can recovery grants support? In general, we call this this is flexible support. So you're going to be answering within the application some general questions of where you will be directing funding. This is not a scored criteria, or it's not going to be reviewed in terms of making your application more or less competitive. There are a small number of ineligible expenses, like I mentioned in earlier, but other than that, you can use this or this funding where it's needed most. So as long as it's within the activity date. So I saw some questions that were pre-submitted about, can I use this to pay for equipment that my organization needs to help my organization? Yes, as long as it's in the activity dates. Can you use it to pay for staffing, for programs, for materials? All of those are eligible expenses for this application. It's really meant to be used where it can be most helpful.
David, someone asks, can I use it for upgrades to an HVAC system to make it COVID safe and compliant? Would that be all right?
Yes, as that counts, as long as it's within the activity dates, then yes, you can use it for your HVAC system.
Excellent. So someone else asks, can the decrease in revenue be from March 2020 through March 2021? So that is to say that now that we are in maybe a recovery period, revenues might be creeping back up again. Are we still eligible if we had that sort of decline before, but now things are increasing? Yes. So if you have, your documentation from after the pandemic began, so let's say your fiscal year ended March 2021, but in the last 3 months, your revenue is increasing again. If that March 2021 fiscal year end document is showing that loss of revenue as compared to the document that ends March 2020, absolutely. You do not have to submit multiple documents from after the beginning of the pandemic. You only need to submit one. So if you have one document that is showing that revenue loss, that's all you need to submit. You don't need to add anything else to show the full length of time that has passed since March 2020.
Great. So I see a question that it sounds like organizations that have operating budgets of less than $100,000 are eligible to apply. However, in the guidelines, it has information about showing total expenses between $100,000 and $100,000. So can we confirm that organizations under $100,000 can apply? Yes. In the guidelines, because organizations of different budget sizes have to show a different level of loss, we have broken the guidelines into two sections. One for organizations with budgets of over $100,000 and another section for organizations with under $100,000. If your organization has an operating budget of under $100,000, when you go into the PDF guidelines, you can scroll down to page 8, which is where guidelines begin for organizations under $100,000. And you could see your eligibility requirements there.
Someone else asks, must the organization have a performing arts focus? No, this is not a discipline-specific program. Your organization can have any kind of arts focus. This is perhaps related to the question about the Restart New York grants. That program is about performing arts organizations. This program is not. But it does have a priority area for performing arts organizations, and particularly those with performing arts programming planned between the start of the program and July of 2022. But just because you don't have it doesn't mean you can't apply. You definitely can. It is just that those organizations may receive a certain kind of priority either in grant amount or in award determination as a result of that status.
I see a question that, is this a rolling grant? If we apply early, can we hear early? It is not a rolling grant, in part because the award sizes and eligibility will be determined by how many people apply for this opportunity. So we will be waiting for the end of the close of the application period before we can begin our review.
Mm-hmm. And if we get this award, and then in a number of months we get the SVOG, or the Shuttered Venue Operating Grant, and it is higher than the $150,000, do we return this grant? Yeah, so if you find out about the SVOG grant after you submit your application, and it is over $150,000, you would need to decline or return the award.
Somewhat similar to that, we said we received a paycheck protection loan. Is this calculated as revenue? So you're going to be looking at your total revenue on your IRS 990. So I think when you that is what we're looking at. We're excluding capital campaign expenses that are restricted, but that is the exclusion. So if your total revenue, including all federal grants, donations, anything else, that all rolls up into the total revenue that you're claiming on your IRS 990 or your board approved financial statements.
Someone says, whom can I contact directly for more information? David answered this in the last slide, but I will just reiterate. You can contact any program staff member. It's generally best to try to contact the person that might be most aligned with your organization's discipline. But if that doesn't seem to apply to you, or if you're just not sure, you can always contact the help desk and they can route your question to the appropriate person.
So I got a question that says, does your organization have to have a mission that explicitly names public programming in its mission statement? So the mission or purpose of your organization should include the arts. Now I think it's important that we ask you what the mission or purpose of your organization is. That might be distinct from your official mission statement. So we're asking you what the purpose or mission of your organization is. You're going to answer that, but we will also be asking you to provide evidence of the track record of publicly accessible programming, which will help us make that determination. So we'll be looking at both of those things in order to make a determination about organizations as being primarily an arts and culture organization.
Is there a maximum amount we can apply for? No, you're not really applying for an amount. There isn't a question that asks you for a request amount. Depending on your organization's size, which is determined by your total expenses from FY19, that will determine the minimum grant amount. And again, those award amounts are for organizations under $100,000, they're a $5,000 minimum award. And for those over $100,000 or exactly $100,000, they are a $10,000 minimum award.
Okay, let's see. Can we apply for support for organization, recovery grants, and special opportunities? We're going to answer this as many times as we have to. Absolutely. You can apply for support for organizations and recovery grants. You can apply for special opportunities and recovery grants. Your application to a recovery grant does not affect your eligibility requirements to any other NYSCA program.
And just down.
Yeah, I've got one. This is another.
Sorting through for ones that we haven't already addressed.
Yeah. So here's a question about the 990 questions, which our losses began mid-March 2020, but our fiscal year ends June 30th, 2020. Therefore, our 2019 990 includes some losses due to COVID-19. Can we submit our 2018 as the baseline for pre-pandemic outcome instead of 2019 990? The answer is you need to have one application. So the pre-pandemic must be your 2019 990 or board proof financial statements that include financial data prior to 2020. But the post beginning of pandemic can be for any fiscal year that includes any portion of time after March 2020.
And a related question to this, if our 2021 fiscal shows a reduced revenue, but we don't have our 990 yet, what document do you need to be board approved? So is it an annual budget? Yes, this would be what you would call either your annual operating budget, your annual income and expense comparison, your P&L or profit and loss statement, however it is that you title it in your organization. We're looking for the comparison of income and expenses for that year, and that should be approved by your budget, and it should be clear what the approval process is, and the approval should be clearly indicated in whatever you upload, whether that's a signature from your board chair or an officer of your board, or sign off from all of your board members, or minutes from your board meeting.
And one thing to add on to that, I know that some people use budget differently. These are actuals. This is not your projected budget. This should be actuals after that you close your books on your fiscal year that gets approved by your board. Let's see. Can you add a capital opportunity in the fall to the equipment question? So we will be having as part of our FY22 guidelines and grant programs, there will be a capital opportunity. The details are not yet released. So I can't tell you what's going to be in the capital grant, but I will say that the way that you use your recovery grant, nothing that you're planning to do with the capital expenses should affect your ability to use this grant. So I would say you might, if you have some major capital construction coming up, like that HVAC question, if you want to be allocating money within the recovery grant to something other than equipment, knowing that that capital opportunity is coming down, that is understandable, but I can't offer any guidance about what's going to be in the capital opportunity.
But relatedly, someone asks a question about how to show the difference between capital and operating income. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, you do not have to include income from a capital campaign in your total revenue if you are calculating the losses of revenue. So how would you demonstrate that? So, some folks have it commingled in the 990 and are not sure how they would handle that. So you can provide an explanation that details the total amount. You can use a board-approved financial document in order to confirm this, and that is what I would advise that you do if it's not clear from your 990. Some folks have financials that are very clearly broken out in the difference. If it is clear, you can point us to the place in the 990 where we can see the figures that you are using. As David mentioned, if there are things that are unclear, we may need to follow up for additional information or clarification before we can determine that you are eligible for the program. And that is certainly a situation where you could imagine that might occur, just for everyone to be prepared for that.
Are service organizations eligible to apply? As long as arts and culture is the central part of your mission, you are eligible to apply. If you are a general service organization that has a art program or project, you would not be eligible to apply. Your mission and purpose must be centered around arts and culture. Let me see more here.
Someone says, is there any downside to applying for this opportunity in addition to other FY22 opportunities? There's no downside to applying. Receipt of this award will not negatively affect your eligibility or opportunity to receive funds in any other program. It will not be a consideration in the review of your application for any other program. We strongly encourage you to apply if you are eligible for the program.
The only thing that I would think about for some of this is if you are applying for multiple activities this year, or if you have a multi-year funding, you want to make sure that you are not using two grants to pay for the same dollar of expenses. It might be a little technical, but let's just say you are applying to support your residency program. You're asking for $10,000 to support your residency program in our special opportunities category. I wouldn't put that same $10,000 as a recovery grant if your total expenses are only $10,000. Use this grant for more of a general operating, unrestricted grant for things that are not necessarily going to be doubling up on your project grants, because there's no subjective review that says that funding your your executive director is less competitive than applying for your residency program, if that makes sense.
Someone asks, if I still have questions about pre-qualification, who can I contact and when should I contact them? So I talked about pre-qualification at the beginning of the presentation, but I think it's definitely worth maybe talking through again briefly. You must be pre-qualified with the state of New York in order to apply for a grant at NYSCA or any agency. And so you do this by updating information in the Grants Gateway portal. NYSCA has an incredible pre-qualification team that you can contact through the help desk. It's help@arts.ny.gov is the email address. They have been phenomenal in making sure organizations get pre-qualified, but we do really encourage you to start this process early if you've never done it before, especially, so that you know what's required and that you make sure you have plenty of time to do it before the grant deadline. And if you are a previous grantee, we encourage you to go into your vault right now and look at your pre-qualification status and look at when it expires. Make sure that it is up to date and it will remain up to date through the application deadline so that you have no surprises in the last week leading up to it and there's no rush or disappointment afterwards to find out that it was expired. Everybody should go in and check on that status and make sure you're very clear on when the vault expires. If you have questions, I really encourage you to reach out to the help desk and to the pre-qualification team. They can answer all of them and help you through it. All of your vaults must be up to date so that you have pre-qualification status by September 1st at 4 p.m., which is the application deadline.
Looks like there's still some questions about the PPP loan and if it gets counted for income in 2020. I'll try to answer it again. So we're asking for financial documents and we're comparing the total revenue on each of these financial documents. So I'm not going to be going through your entire board approved financial statements and pulling out specific items. So I know that federally for PPP loans, when they're forgiven, aren't counted as federal income. If that is how your organization classifies it as you have in your end of year financial statements, that is the number we're going to be using. So whether or not it's in your 990 or in your board approved financial statements, we're going to be looking at what you are counting as total revenue. So I think I believe in the 990, it's not counted as revenue. And so that wouldn't be there. And so it depends on which document you upload. Hopefully that answers that question.
I still have questions about this opportunity. Where can I learn more? There are office hours with NYSCA program staff on Friday that we strongly encourage you to attend. This is an opportunity for you to get all of your specific organizational questions asked and listen to, other questions that other organizations have that might sort of spark something for you or clarify some things for you. It's a much more individualized opportunity for support in the application process. So we strongly encourage you to attend those office hours. And then if you can attend those, or if you still have questions, we encourage you to reach out to program staff directly about your specific concerns and your specific application. And you can do that by visiting the contacts page on the NYSCA website and identifying the appropriate staff person. Or if you already know who that person is, you can reach out to them, or you can contact the help desk at help@arts.ny.gov.
One more about commingling capital expenses on the 990. So because they are commingled on the 990, how do you show what your revenue is excluding capital expenses? If you look at the guidelines, you're going to be each section has you uploading a document and then answering a short narrative. The question is, what was your organization's total annual revenue from before the pandemic as shown on the documentation submitted above, excluding any income restricted for capital projects? So in that section is where you would say, this is my total revenue minus capital expenses, which were this amount. We'll look at that as a statement and then look at your 990 to verify that answer. All right, looks like we have, what amount of activity does NYSCA consider a significant track record of producing and presenting live in-person performing arts events? So I think you are also pulling, so that's pulling from our priorities question. So I want to just first make sure that we're talking about that all organizations need to show a significant track record of arts and cultural activities. We also ask within the priority question about specifically live in-person performing events. So first off, if you're listening to this question, I'm answering this specifically for the priority category. We don't have a specific cutoff. We're going to be looking at it in total with your organization, but you should be listing anything that kind of falls under that category. It needs to be something, and we're going to be looking at applications as they come in and to kind of set that kind of threshold for significant. But we don't want to lock ourselves down to saying it has to be at least one festival that's at least 2 days or how many people have to be in it. We're trying to be fairly open about it.
And someone asks if the IRS 990 form has been filed but is not yet officially approved, can we submit it as a draft? My response to that would be, you could submit it as a draft if you submitted it with some evidence of board approval, that your board is saying that these numbers are accurate. So similar to what I discussed earlier as qualifying as board approval, any of those things would count for that. But if that's the easiest way for you to demonstrate it, then that would be fine. Someone says we are a brand new nonprofit created in 2021. Are we eligible to apply? So the answer to that would be no. And that's for a couple of reasons that you don't meet the eligibility criteria. Number one, you need to demonstrate a loss of revenue from before the pandemic. So if you didn't have revenue before the pandemic, you can't demonstrate that loss. And two, you need to have a significant track record of programming, as David just discussed. And if you haven't had any programming from before the time of this application, then you can't demonstrate that. So you need to have been in existence since before the beginning of the pandemic.
One other question that I think might be connected to that 990 that I remember some folks having asked is whether or not organizations that have that show a higher losses are prioritized over those that have less. And the answer is no. As long as you meet that minimum threshold of $10,000 and $5,000, depending on your budget size, then you will be considered eligible for this program. But we're not going to be prioritizing organizations that have lost a higher percentage or a higher amount, as long as both organizations are above that threshold. And we think it's a fairly, that many organizations that have been affected by the pandemic should be able to meet that threshold of revenue loss.
Okay, so I think we're slowing down on the new questions here. And I think we'll take this opportunity to remind everyone of some key deadlines and contact information and other upcoming things that are of interest. The application portal opens on July 19th and it closes September 1st, 4 p.m. Everyone must have their application submitted before that date in order to be considered for funding. The review is eligibility only, and you must be pre-qualified at the time of the application.
There's a question about dates for use of funds, what the activity dates are. I don't have it right in front of me. It's you will have a full year to spend them, but I don't have the exact dates, but they will be on the guidelines.
Okay, and then final reminders, additional webinars, the Support for Artists webinar tomorrow on Thursday, and office hours on Friday with NYSCA staff. Please reach out to the help desk or to any NYSCA program staff if you have any questions. And with that, we're going to turn it back to Mara to close us out. And we thank you all so much for attending today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Katie and David, for that very rich discussion. We really appreciate everyone joining us from across the state, and we hope that you continue to send questions our way, whether it's joining us tomorrow at the office hours or reaching our staff directly, right? Everyone can be, all contact information for our staff can be found on our website. So please reach out to all staff. We are here to support your application process and journey. So I just want to say this does obviously conclude our webinar for today. This webinar will be posted along with the deck, most likely by the end of today, and we will be sending out an email link to all of you who attended or signed up. I want to remind everyone again that tomorrow's webinar is going to be about support for artists, so please spread the word on that. And also I just wanted to reiterate what David said, which is there's one more opportunity that we haven't developed guidelines for. That's our capital opportunity. Those guidelines will be up in September. And they will be prioritizing health and safety items at your organization. That's about as much as we can share right now. Once again, thank you so much for being with us today. And we hope that you got a lot out of this great discussion. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, David. And thank you all from out in the field. Bye-bye.